Hello and welcome back for the next episode around Show Off Your CI/CD pipeline, which I'm doing with a lot of community builders worldwide. Today, I'm very happy to have Wolfgang on the call that is going to talk to us about a pipeline that he has been building, that he has been using. Wolfgang, very warm welcome to the show.
Hello, Johannes. Nice to be on your Show Off series here. And yeah, I'm going to show today a code pipeline was set up completely with CDK code. So the pipeline itself is made with CDK and all the resources going to be deployed are CDK code. It's going to deploy in different accounts. From the setup, in my example here in my own account, I'm using one account, but it's easy to set up for different staging accounts. And it's going to show how to set up the pipeline, the project itself, and how the pipeline runs and what kind of steps are executed and what's the result of it.
Cool, thanks. Looking forward to see that. Before we go there, what do you do on a regular basis, on a daily basis? Is this what you do for life, or are you working as a consultant? What is your
that's what I do. That's what I do for life. I'm AWS architect. I got our own company. I'm located here in South Brazil in Santa Catarina and have a AWS and cloud company. We are working for German clients or European clients, and also starting by now more growing on the Brazilian market with clients here in the location. And we do everything with cloud, but mostly AWS, helping clients to migrate basically to the cloud, optimizing existing cloud environments, and doing this normally in a kind of project where the client itself is involved with some technicians, and we are kind of specialists to show the customers the best practices and enable also the customer to continue maintaining all cloud services once we have left the project.
Cool. That sounds like a very challenging, but also very interesting role. Did I tell you that I've been living in Argentina for 4 years? I think I didn't, right?
No, I never heard that. That's nice to hear.
Yeah, that's for me, it was really good. So I still speak Spanish, but I hardly use it, unfortunately. Cool. So let's get into your pipeline. Let's start sharing your screen, so we can start looking at what have you actually built, or what you have that others can take away from here. So please go ahead and start sharing your screen, and then I can do my stuff on my side. Okay, so here we are, and feel free to get started.
Okay, so first of all, maybe I can show here my GitHub repository, where you can find also the example code. So this is on GitHub. This is my repositories here, and here is a bunch of repositories and projects. This one is the CDK pipeline, and you can see here the project. I have already deployed it here in my private. That's not the project account. That's my account, and I have here deployed the pipelines. This is a pipeline, and this is a prod pipeline. It's deployed twice, so we have a pipeline for dev account. You can see here. I'm going to explain this a little bit more in detail for the dev and for QA. This is the QA, and to separate more from the IAM permissions, I've created here a different pipeline for prod, so we can really restrict prod pipeline to a couple of users to save our prod environment. Okay, so the whole pipeline is a CDK project. Which you have seen there in the GitHub repository. So I will not gonna...
Before we go in there, just a stupid question. So this is really open source, and others can also use this from you?
No, this is a private code here. This is not a company repository, and this is also example which is I have set up very basic. It's an example code. So I'm not deploying here a sophisticated environment. This is a kind of concerning the resources which are going to be deployed. It's a hello world. So
Okay.
I'm deploying a 3-bucket ECR repository, some lambdas. I have set up also kind of tests, lambda test, unit test, acceptance tests, but they are just a simple implementation. So that's up for everybody to change with his real life requirements and tests there.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Los.
Okay, besides this GitHub repo here, you have also here some README and some information. Just to let me know, I have also a blog about a code pipeline with CDK Python. You find this on my company page. There are some blogs, and here we can also maybe get some more from the requirements. What was the requirement to build this pipeline? So the abstract situation, of course, is we want to deploy AWS resources in different accounts. So we have a setup with a dev account, a int account, or a QA account, a prod account. Doesn't matter how many, could be 3 or 4. We want to deploy these resources. To deploy these resources, we are introducing a fourth account, a toolchain account, where our code pipeline is going to be deployed. So we could deploy it in one of these accounts, but that would mix up a little bit the separation of concerns, for example, if we would put it in the dev account. So it's better to really separate it. And this means we will have a setup of 4 accounts, toolchain account, where could be also serve as kind of a shared services account to put in some ECR repos if we need container images for more than one stage, parameter stores or something. So we're going to deploy maybe some resources in the own toolchain account where the pipeline is, and we're going to deploy the same resources 3 times in our stages, right? That's the basic setup. This means we have here a simplified diagram, not showing all resources from AWS. I don't have included here any VPCs or stuff, but basically I have the code pipeline in my toolchain account. You can set up this code commit also in the AWS. I'm using by now, because it's a public GitHub here, my example, I'm using GitHub here. And the pipeline runs and deploys first in its own toolchain stage. One example resource, it's a ECR repo. And it's then deploying these example resources to the dev, to the QA, and the prod. There's one difference actually here in my deployment I'm going to show by now. I have separated the pipeline in 2 pipelines. So actually it's not one pipeline deploying to all 3. It's actually one pipeline deploying to dev and QA, and one pipeline deploying to prod. So this makes it easier to control the permissions.
Yeah, and that means that you can then granularly control who is allowed to start the pipelines. So I would understand that the lower environment pipelines are triggered by Git, but the production pipeline is something that you would need to trigger manually.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So also the QA is only continuing once you have a manual approval. We're going to see this in a second. So it starts building the dev, and then after dev, all the tests run successfully. It comes to you can see this actually here in one more diagram. Pipeline is looking like this actually. So it got a toolchain stage where the toolchain resource is going to be deployed. Then we have the dev and the QA, and here we have a manual approval. And if we would have the pipeline, the 3 stages in one pipeline, we would have also approval for prod. In my case, it's even separated, so prod will not be able to start from this pipeline. And it looks like this. We can have actually a look in this in the real pipeline before we maybe take a look in the CDK project. So we got an idea how does this look like on AWS. So we have to get here in the developer tools in the code pipeline, and you can see I got there 2 pipelines.
And you are now in the toolchain account, right? Yeah.
Right. I'm in the toolchain account, but one note on this, because I'm using this as an example here for your show-off videos. I have not set up the other 3 accounts. So maybe just one look at the project before we continue there. There's a CDK JSON in a CDK project, and here you can configure some parameters for the CDK project. What is important also for the people who are going to clone this, maybe by now I have changed this because I don't want to share my AWS account ID, but here you have to put your account IDs for the tooling, for the dev, for the QA, and for the prod account, and also for you here for the connection AR. In my setup, I'm showing now, I'm using 4 times the same account ID. So I'm using this account by now as a toolchain, as a dev, as a prod, as a QA account. So that's just for the simple example.
That makes sense,
course,
yeah.
Yeah, of course, you have to consider then one thing. As you can see, I have stopped the prod pipeline, and I have not progressed so far the QA, because since I'm using the same account for dev, QA, and prod, would mean it would deploy the same resources again, which are already deployed for dev, and that would cause an error. So it's supposed to be to deploy the QA resources in a different account. And in my case, it would deploy it again in the dev account because I've set it up like this. So that's why I have never started here the QA and also stopped the prod.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry. So this means that the CDK code that you have in the repository is not environment aware in this case. It really assumes that it is deployed into different accounts depending on the stage where you are, right?
Right.
Because
So we can see the CDK code maybe in a second.
Because I've been, so just to question, right? I've been playing around with CDK in a way like you can have a parameter that defines the environment, and then you can actually deploy the same CDK application multiple times into one account. Is this something that you have also done and that you think is worth exploring, or is this best practice what we're doing here?
Well, for our pipeline, I think it's good to use these stages and add your stacks or what you have, your constructs to the stages. So you can better control what you're deploying there. As we can see here, for example, I have here my toolchain resources I'm going to deploy. So there's basically just a ECR repo. It's a stack. And then we are deploying the dev resources, the stacks. So this is a job definition, a lambda, and yeah, basically these 2. This would mean we can see by now here in the cloud formations that there has been deployed, for example, the devs, job devs, the lambda, and the S3 stack here in my account. And this is controlled by the stage, which holds the CloudFormation stacks. And this way, the QA, for example, holds the same stacks, but pointing to a different account. And this is a clean way to really separate the deployments in here. In my example, of course, once again, I'm deploying QA and dev in the same account. So I've mixed up a little bit here. Actually,
of course.
You can see I have here toolchain ECR repo stack, which is in the same account by now. This should be actually in the toolchain account should actually only be the first for one, and everything else here should be in a different account, but I don't want to switch around here all the time here. Okay, so that's basically the setup of the pipeline and how it looks like in here in the AWS console. We can trigger it manually actually here by saying release change, and it will start. It is also going to be triggered if I do a commit in my GitHub repo. So then it will start automatically. Maybe just one sentence on the steps we have here. The first step is to check out the source, and then it will do a build step, a code build job, which do the synthesize command of the CDK. So this is going to compile the CDK classes to CloudFormation.
Is this going to be on all parts of the CDK code, or is this going to be on the pipeline part of the CDK project?
On all parts. This is kind of, if we would do here in the project, the sync command, this is kind of the same. So this is going to compile all the CDK constructs to the CDK out and going to generate here the CloudFormation, which are in JSON format. And this is the same manually here in my local environment as the pipeline does here in the synth step. Then we have this update pipeline, the self-mutates step, which is doing one thing. We have a pipeline, which is also a CDK construct, right? I'm going to deep dive a little bit in a second. But if you do, for example, here change and you add one more action for tests, or you remove something, you add something in your stages, the pipeline itself must be changed, right? Must be adapted. So therefore, we have the self-mutate to adapt the pipeline. Once there is a need to change the pipeline itself, it's going to change the pipeline and start from the very beginning again. That's important to know. And maybe also one note on this code pipeline by CDK. Once the CDK pipeline is deployed and running, it's enough to do, for example, here git push, update your CDK constructs. And once you have pushed this to the GitHub, the pipeline will run and will update your resources here on this CloudFormation stacks. But on the very first time, you have to do a CDK deploy. Let's see, for example, what we got here for stacks in this project. So you will see by the list command all the CloudFormation stacks which should be deployed, and we also should see the pipeline stack itself. And for the very first time, if your account here is empty and you not have deployed the pipeline, you need to deploy the pipeline with CDK deploy and the name of the pipeline stacks. Pipeline cannot deploy itself once it has been not deployed. So that's the first time you have to do a CDK command line action. But then once this is running, for example, so this would mean you have to run a CDK pipeline to deploy this. Of course, the very first time you also have to install the roles and do a CDK bootstrap. But once set up, you do just change this here and do an update. Right. So next, as we can see here in the pipeline, we have tool change stage and one example stack. And we have also Lambda tests and unit tests. I'm going to show where they are on the project in a second. And once the tool chain is deployed.
Do we also see test reports somehow for the executed tests?
Okay. So you can find here in the details. They're going to, it depends on your output, which you have coded there in the test itself. You can see it there. Next, we have the dev resources. And then we can see we have a manual approval for QA. And if I would say approve, it would continue here to deploy by now the QA. And we can take maybe a look on the prod pipeline. It looks a little bit different. We're going to see in the code why it's different. Now that's so it has again the synth, the self-mutate, but it got here not dev and QA, it got the prod stage. And only once, there is no manual approval, it's just deploying to prod. And now we can maybe have a look
just
how the CDK
question,
project is.
Will this, will the prod pipeline, will this pick up already synthesized CDK stacks, or will this pick up the CDK from source code and then deploy from source code?
Yeah, from source code. Okay. Because you can define, we can see this here actually in a second in the app. You can define the branches for dev and for prod. So for example, you would use for dev development branch and you would use for prod main. So in this means the prod pipeline really has to do a checkout and cannot rely on the synthesized stacks from the dev pipeline.
Yep,
so
makes sense.
Okay, let's take a look in the project here. As we have seen, important is the CDK JSON. You have to adapt this if you want to use the pipeline to your settings and accounts. And the entry point for each CDK project is the app Python, right? There where we define the very first stacks or CDK construct to be deployed. And we can see here also we have some variables, the account numbers, which we are passing then to the pipeline. Here I got these bootstrap roles to deploy from the tools, from the tool chain to the dev or QA abroad. We need a cross account role, right? So the dev account must allow the toolchain account to deploy there, and therefore we have these accounts from these roles access from toolchain account. And
I'm smiling because I think you already had a look on Code Catalyst as well, right? And Code Catalyst essentially tries to remove that toolchain account, right? And put you into the position of not having the need to manage your infrastructure for the tools, right? So I think that is at least one of the interesting things that Code Catalyst brings.
Yeah, that's a good concept, I think, to get rid of the setup of the tool chain and all the cross account roles and settings. This can be a little bit complicated. If you get used to it, if you have deployed 3-4 pipelines, it's more easy. But I think for the very first time, it can be a little bit hard for the developer, and to easy up this is probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, and here finally we can see I got the same pipeline defined as a prod pipeline and as a normal pipeline, and you can see this here. So the pipeline stack itself is a CDK code. Again, we can see it here. It's a CDK construct. And I have also showed here in this code in the CDK project the concept of one great advantage of CDK, the usage of object orientation. So with CDK code, you can subclass. For example, this is my generic pipeline stack, which is here in the folder generic. I have also the infrastructure folder with CIDC, with the project pipeline, which is a subclass of the generic pipeline stack. So this means, for example, I could use this generic pipeline stack as a base class, superclass for many projects. But if in some project I have to change maybe some settings, I don't want to have infrastructure tests, or I don't want to have Lambda tests because there are no Lambdas in the project. I want to use some additional tests. Maybe I could adapt the superclass here by subclassing with this class. And for example, here there's a simple override example. It overrides one of the superclass methods and changes the code, the commands which are executed here. So this is also shown here in this example. And this is something you cannot do with CloudFormation. CloudFormation is more based on copy-paste. And here was the Python code in CDK that's great for reusing some stacks or constructs and creating kind of your own repository which you reuse. Okay, here is the pipeline. It reads some variables, the account, and you can see here the repo and also the branch. And it then creates a pipeline with the synth step as an input parameter and also the source as the input parameter. This is basically the command to create really the pipeline. The pipeline then adds some other components which are following here. For example, here is toolchain deploy, which is of type stage. And here in these stages, we have the stages for the toolchain, for the dev, QA, and prod. You add your resources, your stacks. For example, this is a stack class, ECR stack, and it is very simple setup. It just have a one-liner or ECR repo. And so as a simple example. So you can add here more stacks or straight ahead CDK construct, and meaning they are part of the stage, ends up, they would be listed up here in the stage as a resource. So we can see here the toolchain stage, and here is exactly the ECR repo stack, which is added here. Okay. So if I would add here one more, for example, S3 bucket or EC2 instance, you would see here more resources. So this is the toolchain deploy, which is here found in the pipeline. And next, we are adding here some tests, for example, the infrastructure unit tests and the Lambda tests. And these you can also see here, Lambda tests and unit tests, right?
And this then executes the corresponding tests within your source code. Okay.
Right. Let's take a look in the method for the test. I have all these methods here defined here in the class under this line to allow to override them in the subclass, which I have showed them. So we have here the infrastructure unit test. It's also separated with its own methods command. And here, for example, we can see we are executing PyTest generic infrastructure tests. So these tests are generic infrastructure tests are found in here. So anything you put in there, which is a unit test for Python, is going to be executed, and you can let them run in your pipeline step here for the unit test. Same to the Lambda tests. We can see here these are in infrastructure Lambdas test. So they are in infrastructure Lambdas test. And this means anything you put in here is going to be executed in this action here for the toolchain. Okay, so we have seen the toolchain stage, and next is going to be the dev. Where's dev? Here's the dev stage. Let's take a look on the dev stage. And this one is set up with a little bit more resources, 3 resources. I got a S3 stack. I got a job dev stack for batch environments, and I got a Lambda function here with this construct. And we can see here, we should find these, the job dev, the Lambda, and the S3.
Do you happen to know what the difference between prepare and deploy here is?
Well, at first, it does the prepare and executes the deploy after it. So I think it checks kind of the assets which are also being passed to the CloudFormation stacks, probably change syntax. In case of it's already deployed, it will set up a change set, and then finally doing the deployment. So there are always 2 actions, prepare and deploy. Right, so this one is an example for a stage where we have these 3. And we can see this is actually the same for dev and for QA. I'm using the same stage. So QA, of course, does not have a different one. I'm just passing another name to it. So I can reuse the class, the CDK class, which is defining as a resource to be deployed. Also, the prod is using the same one. I'm just passing this one as the prod environment, right? So in this stage here, in the app deploy, are the resources defined which are going to be deployed in dev, in QA, and in prod. The stacks itself, for example, let's take a look at the Lambda. They are defined here in the CDK project with a normal convention. As you set up a CDK project, you can find these, for example, this one is in infrastructure, and I have categorized this a little bit here as a batch for a batch environment. Here is for CI/CD, the pipeline itself and the stages, and here's for the Lambdas, for example. And this one is a CDK stack, which is creating a Lambda function. The code itself for the Lambda function, it's separated. It's set up here in the Lambda source folder. So this is following CDK best practices. This is not special for the pipeline. And here is basically already the end of the pipeline. Once we have also defined the QA stage and the pipeline is done, or otherwise for the prod pipeline, it's a prod step. We can see here also maybe the manual approval step before the QA. Let me see, where is this one? Here. Here, for example, is the manual approval step, which you have to click as a pipeline user to move the pipeline to the QA stage.
Okay. Cool. Now, let's look at the unit tests and the acceptance tests that you have defined, especially in the stage before, right after the deployment, I think, the ones that we had. We execute just unit tests. We measure code coverage or something like that?
In this simple example, no,
Okay.
It's not set up yet. In the project, it's set up. We can take a look up here, for example, how this looks like in here. So here, this is executing the tests. And because I'm just running a simple PyTest command, it's only executing this. But of course, you can set up with the PyTest configurations. You can set up here reports, you can set up coverages, and you can also generate report there. Since the project is already a little bit harder to understand, I didn't want to blow up with too much features. This is basically up to do here in the definitions for the test, where you're doing the commands for the test. In this part, you have to edit everything concerning test, execution, coverage, and reports. Okay,
cool, great. So this series starts to turn into a Johannes needs to learn Python thing, because I've not done much Python before, and I've always tried to get around Python. Now you're the second person presenting Python code here, so I'm learning a lot with this as well. So thank you so much.
I like for CDK Python a lot. From my background, I programmed a lot of Java, so I'm actually programmed 15 years Java Enterprise, Spring, and so on. And I liked very much Java, but it's for CDK, I think I would always prefer Python, because it's just the setup is much smaller, and it's not so heavy as the whole Java setup.
We could argue about that now, right? So I'm also a Java user at the end, right? But I would rather go with TypeScript than Python in this case, and that's what I'm doing myself, because the CDK itself is written in TypeScript, right? So that is a little bit more. I was hoping for getting a little bit more support, right? But I think it doesn't really matter, and you need to choose, and this is what CDK is great for. You need to choose the technology that makes you happy at the end, right? And that you can use. So this is really, and it's cool to have those choices.
Maybe for those listeners who are not really deep into CDK yet, it's good to have a look here on this AWS site, the AWS CDK workshop, and there you can find a really good documentation on how to create your first CDK project. And you can find here also what we just have talked about, the different languages which are supported. So we have Python, and we have Java, we have TypeScript, and we have some more. I wouldn't actually want to use .NET. But yeah, for example, very common is, I think, TypeScript in Python, and also Go, which are widely used. And this is a good point to get in and set up a first project, set up the first command. And if somebody hadn't done this yet, it would be really helpful to do this first, setting up an easy CDK project before starting with the pipeline, and it would help to get an understanding on the project about the CDK classes itself.
Yep, that's good. That's cool. Great. So I think, what else did you want to show from the project, Wolfgang? Because if not, we can move over to kind of a wrap up.
I think this is quite some most stuff. We can maybe just have a look a little bit on here. For example, what we have created here on the CI/CD tools. We have the pipelines with CDK. You can create your pipelines, of course, also on the UI. The pipeline itself, once you have selected one, you get the history, right? You can see the execution history for the pipeline also. You can, which I have not set up for this example, you can set up quite a bunch of notifications. For example, if you want to get notified when a stage failed or the whole pipeline failed, or someone maybe did not execute the manual approval, you can set up a SNS topic and email notification on this.
But this is something that you would also be able to do in code, right?
Of course,
so,
of course, yeah. Just showing this here by now, as it also works on the UI. But of course, you would set up this in the CDK construct for the pipeline, the notification. And the pipeline, as we have seen, is basically set up with CodeBuild steps. So most of these parts here are always, as you can see, CodeBuild. So Synth and also the CloudFormation deployments here. And this means when we take a look here in CodeBuild, not CodeDeploy, we can see all these projects which have been set up by the code pipeline. And also one more thing maybe to take a look, you will find this in the README of my documentation from the GitHub or also in the blog. If you're not using code commit, if you're using, for example, GitHub or any other repository outside AWS, you have to set up here this connection. So a GitHub connection in connecting your GitHub repository to AWS. And this will mean here in the, let me see if I can find this here in the settings, you will find this AWS connector for GitHub, which connects and also uses solves for you all the notifications, for example, on pushes or on pull requests and all this stuff. Okay, so I think so much information on this.
So much information on this, yes. And if you would stop sharing your screen now, then I can put you back on spot. Cool. Yeah, this is great input. I think for a lot of people that are starting their journey with CDK and CDK pipelines, this is exactly what they need to get going, right? What do you think that you would want to do? That you just said this is an example project, right? What is things that you would add in a professional project, I would say? Is that stuff that you're maybe missing today in this example?
Yeah, there are some chances to stuff other. For example, what I've not set up in this simple example, because it would blow up too much everything, is, for example, pull requests. So you want to maybe build also your pull requests before you merge them into the master. So this pipeline does not support this, and this makes the example code in CDK quite a little bit more complicated. This means you need GitHub notifications when the pull request is created, and you have to create a pipeline itself, because you cannot run it on your dev pipeline, for example, because it's always fixed to one branch. And this means if you create a pull request, there must be running some code there to create a pipeline and also delete it afterwards. For example, if you have 4 open pull requests, you would have seen 4 more pipelines there. And but you wouldn't need to do this, for example, in a professional proper environment and project, to be able to run all the tests on the pull request before merging it back into the development or in the main account. So this would complicate things a little bit, but probably be necessary in a project setup.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks a lot. What else would you like to share with the audience? Any other open source projects that you think are worth mentioning, where people can learn something in addition to this from you already, or blog posts that you would like to bring up?
Yes, just take a look in my GitHub account. There are various sources. So I have CDK examples. There are a lot of CDK examples showing also using how to use pip modules, so reuse some models for CDK. It's not only the pipeline, it's an example for deploying a Fargate service with CDK. You have also quite some CloudFormation examples, a lot of stuff there. I have also what you're gonna like, some Java and Spring containers to deploy as Fargate services there, examples. And so you find in my GitHub repo a lot of stuff. You will also find on this blog page I've showed on my page. I mean, I will give you all these links so you can pass over. You find some more blogs from me concerning batch environment, CDK, and other AWS topics as well. Also, I got a YouTube channel, and there are about 25 or 30 videos by now, where I'm also explaining not in the blog, but in the YouTube format, a lot of things about AWS, and the last videos have been also about this CDK pipeline, but a lot about containers, Fargate, and Kubernetes, and all this kind of stuff.
Cool. Then let me add that to the show notes as well. And how can people get in touch with you or ask you questions if they have anything or would like to follow up on what they've seen today?
Well, for example, on my YouTube channel, you can comment. I'm not sure I can always answer there, but also on my website, where the blog is hosted, is the info email from my company. But for real question concerning technical questions, I can probably pass you an email there, where people who has really dedicated questions can forward these questions straight ahead to me, and I will try to get back to them.
Awesome. So that means that you're not a Twitter or Mastodon junkie.
No.
Because that's what I hear a lot, right? This is my Twitter handle, or this is my Mastodon account. This is where you can reach out to me.
No,
cool.
I'm not using Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn, of course. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, but not too much on Twitter. Okay,
cool. Then thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to present this pipeline. And looking forward to do more collaboration. So if I can join you on your channel to present some stuff that I've been doing, let me know. Would be happy to do so. And thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your hopefully sunny day over there. As here in Germany, it's been gray and raining the whole day.
No, we're here. I cannot complain. We have a sunny day. And yeah, thanks so much to be here on your SHOWOFF series. It was a pleasure. And I hope the listeners have got some insights into CDK and CodePipeline with CDK. And yeah, can also take a look to other projects in my GitHub or my blog.
Thank you.
Thank you, and greetings,
Bye-bye.
Germany. Bye.